Is Sarah Bahat with us?
Here.
All right. Zach.
Yep. Hello.
Hi. Rashad. Gabriel. Shays. Yep. Mason. Is Mason Cho with us?
Yeah.
Nicole is with us. Ruben. Jeremy.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Chalmin.
Here.
Hi. Cameron.
Here.
Wei Chen. Hi. Gabriel Jacobs.
Present.
Quan. Humli. And Jennifer.
Hello.
Hi. Tito. Vicky.
Here, yes, Vicky is here.
Hi, Vicky.
Hi.
Laurel.
Hi.
Hi, Laurel. Lika. Lika Sue. How about Ian?
Hello.
Hi. Cindy.
Here.
Cindy, there you are. Gloria.
Hi. Here.
Hi. And Haley. Hi. And Kelsey. And we have one new student this week. Who is that?
Here.
We have
You can
two.
call me Myra.
Myra Meng.
Yeah. Right.
What are
Hello.
your preferred pronouns?
She, her.
And who's the other who joined?
Hello.
Hi. What's your name, please?
Gia, Bishon.
How do you spell your last name?
Biscione.
And your pronouns, please?
She, her.
Okay, great. All right, well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Contemporary Political Theory Module 2, okay? How's everybody doing? Hanging in there? All right. Haley is not, Hartley is not with us yet. She was going to moderate the chat for us. She had the idea last week, since some of you are avid chatters, that she would moderate that or curate that or whatever you want to call it, because, highlighting questions that you all are asking or comments. Feel free to use the chat. No promises that I am able to keep up, though, since, I'll be doing other things. But if anybody sees anything in the chat that you'd like to share, go right ahead. I imagine some students would like to use the chat if you're a little bit reticent to speak, so feel free. I'm going to share my screen here and go take a look at Canvas with y'all. So just so you all see, I put the Zoom address for all our classes right here at the top, okay? So that's where you can go to find our meeting place every week. Module 1, which was last September, I had the syllabus there. I had a couple of articles pertaining to our discussion about COVID and the politics of the pandemic. And I have a video of our class meeting as well, if anybody wants to see it. I'm going to be recording every week and posting it here. This is where we are for today, Wendy Brown. As I indicated to you, this is one of 2 texts that you'll have to procure yourself. You can get this, and the other book is the book by Fukuyama, Identity. I don't care if you get them in digital version, of course, whatever's easiest. Digital versions you can get in the blink of an eye, so that's fine by me. And you all put your reading responses here. These are the questions that were due today by class time. I'll be looking at those later today or tomorrow. And I will be including comments if I feel, if I feel I need to comment on anything you've written, or if I want you to try to say more, or if anything was vague or confusing, I'm going to leave comments there. So please do pay attention to those, okay? And here's your reading responses for next week. And you will be reading chapters 5 and 6, okay? Just going to glance over at the syllabus, although I think I pretty much covered all that. Where are we? We are right here, okay? And we'll be doing Wendy Brown today and Wendy Brown next week, okay? All right, I'm going to pause there, see if anybody has any questions about any of that business. Anybody have any questions about any of that stuff? All right, great. So for today, we're going to talk about Wendy Brown. I thought this was an important book to start with because it is one of the more theoretical books we're going to be dealing with. Wendy Brown is one of my favorite contemporary philosophers. She teaches at Berkeley in California. She is one of the most important living American political philosophers. And she's becoming quite prolific lately. And for those of you who know Judith Butler, I know Judith Butler is even more esteemed and very popular. Wendy Brown is Judith Butler's partner, life partner. And some of their ideas in their writing do overlap, but Wendy Brown definitely has a different focus, which I appreciate. I thought I would start just by seeing how it all went, how this reading went with you all. How was this? Anybody have any general comments about reading the Wendy Brown?
First chapter was pretty enjoyable and understandable. A lot of it, like going over concepts, I think that I don't know in other classes and already know. I found like chapter 4 quite tedious. I knew what she was talking about, but it kind of like felt like it was cycling over itself a lot. I think it's like pretty common with like things that are like direct from the source philosopher versus somebody like analyzing the philosopher, is that like it's sort of like banging my head like, yes, you've made the point, like and sort of like it's not good because at some point like halfway through the 4th chapter I sort of tuned out. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? Did anybody find this easy to navigate or understand or difficult for writing?
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty easy to understand for most of the time compared to a lot of the academic stuff that I've read in previous classes.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? I chose this book because, as I indicated to you last week, I like philosophers who I think are good writers. And I think she's a pretty good writer. Not eloquent or, necessarily, but cogent and clear, and as opposed to being arcane and overly complicated. I also like the book because she talks about some good examples, some historical examples. In chapter 4 in particular, you get examples of Obama's State of the Union address, or that was his inauguration address. And then when she talks also about what happened in the war in Iraq in 2003, 2004. That is, for you all, that is ancient history. You were little kids at the time, but I remember that period pretty well. And that is a period in our history which I think we should remember. You know, when I was reading over it, I was thinking to myself, I can't believe we did this country, America, that is. It's really quite remarkable. But in any case, I'm gonna dive into the reading and just move along. And maybe I'll pause for a second, see if anybody has any general questions that they wanted to ask about the reading. All right, that's fine. Well, let's talk about, I mean, the main topic here, of course, is this thing called neoliberalism. Neoliberalism. Neoliberalism, I don't know where that term comes, when that term was coined. I don't know where it comes from. But I'm going to pick up a, hang on, I'm trying to get in the chat. Sorry, I want to try and put the chat next to me here. I have a colleague who uses the chat as like a chalkboard. I think I'm going to do that if that's okay with you all. The term neoliberalism. Well, before I give it away, why don't I turn it over to you all first, and she talks about this thing called neoliberal reason. There you have it in the chat. What does she mean by neoliberal reason? How does she identify it?
She called it an order of normative reason.
Of what?
Normative reason.
An order of normative reason, yes. Normative with respect to what?
With respect to governing
Good.
the people.
Thank you. Who wants to pile on there? Neoliberal reason. What is the normative reason of governing that is neoliberal reason? How does it view governing?
It's sort of it's not necessarily hands-off approach in the way that maybe conservatives, a lot of conservatives seem to posit, but more of governing towards sort of, rather than sort of an aim towards societal benefit, towards economic benefit, with the idea that economic benefit is bilaterally ultimately benefits the citizens.
Good. Thank you. Anybody else? She tells us on page somewhere, around 17, 18, she calls neoliberalisms, she talks about the how do I say this? Economization, the economization of political life. It transforms all political, social, cultural considerations into economic ones. And she argues that this is an approach to governing that is infecting democracies all around the world and is effectively hollowing out democracy from the inside. It is a challenge to democracy, but it's a kind of challenge that hollows it out from the inside as opposed to being an external attack. I'm actually going to dive a little deeper into this economic philosophy that is neoliberalism before I talk a little bit about its background. I'm going to call your attention to a quote on page 22 here, where she lays out its essential principle. And it's kind of a pregnant passage with some meaty things we need to pull apart. She tells us the top of 22. This book will suggest that neoliberalism has returned it with a vengeance. Both persons and states are construed on the model of the contemporary firm. Both persons and states are expected to comport themselves in ways that maximize their capital value in the present and enhance their future value. And both persons and states do so through practices of entrepreneurialism, self-investment, and/or attracting investors. Any regime pursuing another course faces fiscal crises, downgraded credit, currency, or bond ratings, and lost legitimacy at the least, bankruptcy and dissolution at the extreme. Likewise, any individual who veers into other pursuits risks impoverishment and a loss of esteem and creditworthiness at the least, survival at the extreme. Good. So countries are like firms. Countries are like corporations. Who should run them in that case?
Board of directors.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other ideas? Who should run the show? If the nation is like a corporation, what kind of people should be running this?
People who understand the system.
That's kind of general. Can I get some specifics, please?
Like if you understand how to, well, if a corporation is about like, water purification, you don't want someone who digs for a living to be in charge.
Right.
With no background on.
So can you give me? I understand your point, but can you say who it is that's supposed to be running the show?
An elected official or one person. I don't know.
From where? From what sector? Come on,
From-
out with it.
From the people of the nation, not a puppet leader, like an actual person.
I mean, from what area of society?
Oh, I guess in this sense, it would be from an elite and taught society rather than like if you want to look at it feudally, you wouldn't have a peasant do it. It would be someone who's actually taught in a school.
All right, he's right on the edge of the cliff, everybody. Someone needs to push him over. Where did this leader come
Private
from?
sector was, I think, the word you were looking for.
Is it?
Yeah.
I didn't hear what you said.
I said private sector.
Gosh, you guys are all so fancy schmancy. We need a fucking businessman, right? A businessman. And we have a businessman, right? And it's going great. And there are people, plenty of people, and recall how when he was running for office and his mantra was, I have been a success in the business world. That's why I should be running this show, right? There have been a few other cases where people from the business world have run the state. The only other one who comes to my mind is Silvio Berlusconi. He also did a bang-up job in Italy. But you get the idea. If a nation is like a corporation, then we need people who are economically savvy or business people who can run it. Okay, and there's a host of decisions or a host of likely policy measures that follow from that. Okay, but notice what he says. He uses the word homology. Sorry, she uses the word homology. Homology is to say that a person is also like a state, which is like a corporation. So guess what, everybody? Thanks to neoliberalism, citizens are also supposed to be like firms or corporations. You are a budding corporation. This is so exciting. How are you like a corporation? Or I'll put it this way, how are you prodded how are you encouraged or maybe even pressured to behave like a corporation?
Well, and one thing that I can think of is just like I think like this has something to do with the question that you asked in your responses thing. Where
I
like,
have no idea.
oh, okay, cool.
I wrote this last week. I don't remember. So go ahead.
Okay. This has to do with just like when you ask the question on the response thing, it's like how neoliberalism changed how we view as like a college education. Like I remember like thinking when I was writing that, I was like thinking about how like people would like students or just people in general would just choose colleges based on like based on like a major that will get them a job that will make them more money, and everything's just very like financial based and kind of like working towards being your own like entrepreneur and marketing yourself and stuff like that.
Ooh, I like it. Entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurialism. She argues that you are urged to be entrepreneurs. But you're not in business school. You're in art school. Are you urged to be entrepreneurs?
Yeah.
I
Like
know you are because I watch you all every day for 15 years. It's kind of it's awful, the pressure you're under. How do you have to sell yourself? Tell me.
social media and posting work on there, making websites and portfolios and posting it online, and making connections with other people to be able to display works in different places.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
I think it even goes as far as like, I've met some people who are even, they get more social anxiety just even thinking about like how one interaction could like mess up everything or change everything. Like, oh, maybe that person 10 years down the road is somebody that is going to help you out, or maybe that person 10 years down the road is somebody that like you need help from, or even somebody that like you're having a bad day, you say something to them you don't mean, and you don't want to be on their bad side 10 years down the road, even if they for some reason have the reason to hold a tiny comment as a grudge. But yeah, it can go down to even like tiny interactions and little things like that of like selling yourself. And I know some people feel like they have to be on all the time when it's like more on campus and more around professors and things like that.
That sounds like a lot of pressure. You guys share that sense? That sound familiar? Or is Gia working herself up into a frenzy here for no reason? This is the time to tell her, everybody.
I mean, also like critique of the school has been not necessarily hollowing out budgets, but as sort of we've added more students to the roster, the budgets for what departments are getting funded is very clearly, trying to people that quote unquote make money. So we're talking about like graphic design, illustration, I think animation, game design, which are all credible fields, but fortunately it's not really not going to the fine arts department, nor is that really championed if you go look at like a lot of the school's media as much.
Right, you can see the change Micah has gone through. Like Micah was an esteemed fine arts institution, and not to say that graphic design, animation, all that are not important, but that's how they recruit people now, and that's how they get parents to sign on. Oh, your kid is going to get a job right out of college if they go here.
Excellent.
Or like you hear students say like the only reason that I was able to go to art school is if I majored in graphic design, but I want to take all these artsy classes.
You may go, but you may not fuck around, right? We have a lot to say. We have a big discussion about college and neoliberalism, but that's principally for next week because that'll be part of your reading. So I'm gonna set that to the side for now. I'm really excited. I think that discussions of college education and college economics are so important, and it's really amazing the way this pandemic has, pulled the curtain back and really, highlighted these issues in ways that for some reason we were sleepwalking for decades, not paying attention to. But I want to talk about one thing before we, at this point. I want to talk about this idea of entrepreneurialism, okay? That you have to be an entrepreneur yourself. So I have a question. One of the terms I've learned at Micah is branding, okay? I think the graphic designers told me about branding. So I'm wondering, I have a question. Do you have a brand? Are you a brand? Are you urged to brand? You don't have to tell me what your brand is. If you want, I don't care. That would be lovely. But anybody want to talk about that? Do you have to brand? And where do you do the branding? And how do you do the branding? And how do you feel about it?
Well, I feel like part of where I have to think about, or like I have had to thought about, like myself as a brand is mostly on Instagram, which nowadays is like a synonym for like your portfolio, because basically most people that get to see your work is through Instagram. So you want it to be like cohesive and you want to express something. And just the way that Instagram is set up kind of like calls for like some degree of branding.
Okay.
Yeah, to add on to that, I cannot express how much I resent like having to use Instagram and like having to on some level care about how many likes I get, because like really I do not care, but I'm compelled to by everything that I think it was Nicole just said. Like it is becoming one of the biggest platforms for artists.
Makes it sound like you artists have to be individual entrepreneurs to quite a degree. I was a liberal arts major myself, majored in philosophy. I didn't have to do any of this stuff. Maybe things would be different now, but maybe there's also a special, especially high degree of branding and self-promotion that has to go with your specific field, right? If you don't sell yourself, who will, right? How about this? Is the branding limited to your work life? Or does the branding seep out into other areas?
Well, my cousin, for example, she's a writer, and most of the I don't know how to say that in English, where you print the books, like the editorial house or whatever, they have asked her multiple times to see her personal accounts also, because they're looking for like a profile that fits with the like aesthetics or branding of the book. So like she serves a lot, so she completely altered her personal Instagram to fit with the aesthetics of the book and like within the branding of like that the editor was looking for.
Thank you.
I mean, I also feel like, I don't know, I think just like existing kind of is like a sort, like I feel like the kind of like facade almost you put out to like the world, this like performative action of like curating like what it means to be like you as an individual. I feel like I feel like I have friends who are like, no, like, do you like would, I don't know, they'll like send me like a picture of like a jacket or something and be like, I really want to wear this, but I feel like it's not like my thing, so I can't do it. And it's like, I don't understand. It's like, there's nothing, like, it's like weird to think about like sort of, no matter like how much you preach this, like, I am myself kind of thing, you're always sort of performing, even to like yourself, that, yeah, I just feel like that's like sort of an aspect
that's kind of branding in a way.
I think also like nowadays, like where marketing is kind of leaning towards now is just like personalized marketing, where it's like basically a lot of things like one of the examples I can think of is like with art, at least, like it's not only just the work that you make, it's also kind of like there's also some little bit of emphasis on the personality of the artist and stuff like that. So even your personality, whatever, if it's like fake or real or not, in a way it's kind of turned into a branding for yourself. So like you can see that with a lot, just like in general, just social media platforms like TikTok or Instagram or like Twitter or anything. Just like anything you put out kind of gives you some form of like a persona that people are going to perceive you as and see that as your like quote unquote branding. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, some of you mentioned social media here. You know, do you feel compelled, or is there a compulsion to brand your social life too? You know, to stay. Where does that come from? You know, I can tell you right now, I don't do it because I'm hopeless at social media. But you know, this seems to be one area. Well, was it Wei Chen mentioned life, right? Life itself has to be branded. That sounds, I'm exhausted just saying those words, you know. You have to brand when you step out of the shower. I mean, but social media strikes me as a pretty broad extension or expansion of branding into your social life, right? Where, you know, the word like curate is often used, right? It's quite remarkable, you know. But there is this, so, well, at least I think Gia was mentioning the sense of that there's a sense of pressure here. Do you guys all share that? Maybe do you share the sense of pressure not only with the work life, which is obvious, but does it get tiresome in the social life too? I know where Ray Chen feels about this.
I mean, like for like a couple months, I like, you know, that like function on like your, what is it, like the app, like in Apple where you can like tell, it's like time, something that like, it like turns the app off for you so that you can't like, it makes it harder for you to like go in and use the app. I like, I don't know, 3 months into quarantine, I realized I was like sitting on social media, just like swiping through. Cause like, I felt like I had nothing else to like do. Mm-hmm. And so like, I think there was like, for some reason I was like getting a lot of pressure from that, even though, I don't know, like I don't even like post that often because it gives me pressure. But it's just something about like the presence of like this thing that I have actively put out for people to perceive me as is like, I don't know, it's like nerve-wracking to have that just there and like available for people to just judge.
I mean, there are reports that levels of anxiety rise thanks to social media use. My limited and wimpy extent of my social media use, I was on Facebook, and then I stopped, and I feel much better that I don't even do that. I mentioned to you all last week that I have a new book that I just released, and I've been urged to get on the Twitter and do the Twitter, and I suck at the Twitter really bad. So if someone wants to do it for me, I would greatly appreciate it. But oh, Jennifer wants to be free like me. I'm not that free. Don't let this fool you. I have a thing called a mortgage and a credit card debt and kids. I'm the opposite of free. I just feel a little bit less. I feel a little mentally free. But you know, I do have to say, like, I've been teaching my kids for a very long time, and I've taught at other schools, and I'll go back to what I said a minute ago. Like, you guys really are urged to be entrepreneurial to quite an extent that I don't see in other places. You know, if I came out of a regular liberal arts college, I just need to work on my CV, right? So that I get hired. For you, you know, as artists, many of you may be solo operations for a while, in addition to whatever, you know, job you have. And of course, as Gabriel pointed out in the chat, you know, branding is part of making yourself a stable asset so that you can be hired and rehired as or if you circulate through the economy, right? So it's amazing. You know, I know that colleges pay close attention to your social media presence when you apply to school. I'm guessing employers do too, so that they can keep an eye on you and they understand the kind of commodity that you are, right? This is pointing to what Gabriel's saying about being a stable asset. They want you to be a known quantity. Good. Well, we'll revisit this as we go along, but I want to press ahead now with some more points about neoliberalism. Let's talk about neoliberalism itself as you know, the kind of you know, the kind of specific economic policies it favors, it pushes for. What concrete economic policies does neoliberalism call for? What kind of economic policies would we call neoliberal?
Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
Sure. What economic policies does neoliberalism recommend?
I was going to say this, like, it's quoting from the book that like all conduct is economic conduct.
Well, yes. Okay, but now I want to hear some specific economic policies. I'll give you a softball, everybody. Raise taxes, lower taxes.
Is it like how the example they were saying that depending on the rate, I don't remember if it was acceptance, that they got more state support or less, like colleges?
Good.
Would deregulation be one?
Deregulation is one. I'm going to go through a couple of these. Anybody know what deregulation means? What kind of regulations might be in the target of neoliberal policies, neoliberal governing? I'll give you a hint. We have a businessman president. What kind of regulations is he undoing, everybody?
Environmental?
There you go. What other regulations are in the crosshairs? Maybe not this guy, but in general.
Healthcare.
Good. Let me be very clear. Why are environmental policies in the crosshairs? Why deregulate?
They interfere with business.
They interfere with business? Yes, go ahead.
I have I feel like this interesting, like, I don't know, it's not where versus like neoliberalism, like the two branches of it, because I believe that like while Trump has a strong branch of neoliberalism, Biden is like also an equally strong branch of neoliberalism. And like, I don't necessarily associate deregulation necessarily, more like dismantling sort of existing structures for doing things and then offloading it, you know, those responsibilities to private sector. Whereas deregulation is, I feel like there are plenty of like very neoliberal sort of countries that that do so sort of without deregulation. It sort of becomes like a left-right axis thing. So I know why, but I don't like putting deregulation, because then it seems like by Biden not deregulating things, he's not as neoliberal when he absolutely certainly is.
Well, excellent point. Hang on there. I am going to speak to that in a second, but I want to be very clear about what we're talking about here when it comes to deregulation. So Gabriel, you point out, I said, why the move to deregulate? Why the move to, you know, to diminish environmental regulations? And you said because it interferes with business. How exactly do environmental regulations interfere with business? Can you be bluntly clear?
They stop it from being as efficient as they can, right? In terms of in terms of generating whatever they do for the amount that you put in of capital to what you're getting out,
It
right?
makes them less profitable, right? There you go. So these regulations should be disbanded. Environmental regulations should be disbanded because the government wants to help cut costs, right? What other regulations cost money, y'all?
Welfare.
Yes. Well, hang on. When I'm talking about regulations, I'm talking about regulations on business, right? So what kind of regulations on business would a neoliberal regime want to get rid of? There are environmental rules. They will get rid of those. What else?
It already happened, but airline regulations,
Like what?
like airline pricings, and
Price
like
controls
mm-hmm.
that favor the consumer. Excellent. What else?
Minimum wage.
Minimum wage. Okay. That's not a regulation, but that is something that would be in the crosshairs. If you work in a factory, what other regulations pertain?
Working conditions.
Worker safety.
Just all the
OSHA. So, sorry, Gia?
Just all the ways that oh my gosh, English, that labor could be exploited when you take away regulations and
Right. So get rid of these regulations that either protect the worker or protect the consumer or protect society as a whole. So environmental, labor, health, safety, and such, right? Deregulation, that's one platform. Now to what Gabriel was saying, she points this out, right? Obama himself was no enemy of deregulation because of the general overarching ethos, which is that we treat the nation like an economy or like an economic engine that has to be given gas and juiced up at times. And one of the ways to do that is by deregulating, right? So it's certainly the case that, it's hardly surprising that Biden will be doing those kinds of things because if he wins, he's going to inherit an economy that's in tatters. So perfectly fine point there. There are matters of degree here, and I'm building up to that. So a neoliberal regime is going to deregulate. It's going to lower taxes. It is going to, someone mentioned, it's going to cut the minimum wage. It's going to undermine welfare, right? And cutting taxes and cutting welfare go hand in hand because the tax base is diminished. There are less resources then to spend on these social places, on these social programs, excuse me. She also uses the word quite a bit, privatization. I'm going to put this in the chat. Who can tell me what privatization is?
When you take things like water companies or electric companies and then you sell them off to private companies instead of being held by the government.
Good. Can anybody give an example of privatization?
Internet companies.
Gabriel, what'd you say?
Internet companies, fiber, all this.
Well, weren't they private to begin with?
Well, I'm not entirely sure about the history of that.
No, but they're heavily subsidized.
I'm sorry, Gabe, what'd you say? They're subsidized?
They're heavily subsidized, yeah. Because otherwise there's no incentive for them to provide service for a lot of people. Just as the cost to put the infrastructure together for people in more rural communities doesn't make sense for them.
Well, subsidization is not necessarily privatization. That's actually something else. I mean, that's like the incestuous relationship of government and business.
What? No, I was saying the removal of subsidization and then selling off of elements of the government backbone.
Good.
For those things.
Okay. Privatization, strictly speaking, is when a public service or a public venture is taken private. It is sold to private entities and then run like a business.
Like prisons?
First, I remember there was, I don't think I was born, but, or maybe, no, I was like, I know that my parents talk a lot about how the Panama Canal, the company that used to be in charge of all the like water resources and reserves, used to be like part of the government, and it didn't work. It always had problems.
Mm-hmm.
And there was like this big debate because it was privatized and it was sold to a private company and it like fixed everything. I don't know why, but
Good.
What about
Yeah, before I was just saying like prisons because like
Oh,
the
yes.
internet companies was mentioned, and then you asked if those were always private though, and then I was curious because everyone always talks about the privatization of prisons and how like Procter Gamble, all of those kinds of companies, like you can go on and on about who actually uses like prison labor and things like that, but were prisons always private?
Nope. No, they were not. Prison privatization is actually an excellent example. I was struggling with some examples in this country. I think someone else was trying to speak up, though. Let me see. Was there someone else who wanted to chime in?
I said hospitals.
Hospitals. Hospitals were run, early days in America at least, they were run by charities. But it is true there are a couple private, I mean, many of them are run by corporations as well, but hospitals is such a complicated beast. I'm going to stick to prisons for a little.
like schools.
Schools, there are a couple schools that are being privatized in this country, that's for sure. By the way, I want to introduce you to a term here. I just put it in the chat, structural adjustment. I believe it does come up. Neoliberal reason, this view of that, you know, that a nation should be run like a corporation, that is an ethos that has really gripped a body called the IMF and the World Bank. And the IMF stands for the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank is explanatory. These are two lending institutions. They lend to nations, and they sit across the street from each other in Washington. The World Bank is typically chaired by an American. The IMF is chaired by a European. And I believe the United States is the biggest. It gives the most money to both. For those of you who may have heard these terms, you know, nations occasionally get bailed out by the IMF or the World Bank if they go bankrupt, you know, if they had too much debt. And in order to, you know, basically the way a nation runs everybody is that a nation will sell bonds to investors in order to finance their programs. United States, we call these treasury bills. And the United States is generally a very safe investment. In business speak, they say that investors take refuge in T-bills. What that means is that if you feel that the stock market is too up and down, too rambunctious, you can take refuge, which it is right now, you can take a refuge in T-bills. The United States has a lot of buyers of treasury bills around the world. This means that we have a lot of money that we can then use to finance our various programs. The United States has a lot of debt. Because we have a lot of buyers, this is the rule of supply and demand. Because we have a lot of buyers, we set the interest rate on our treasury bills quite low. It doesn't have to be high. By interest rate, I mean that if you buy that bond, that's the return to the investors. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, the nation of Greece went effectively bankrupt. And in order to raise funds, they had to incentivize investors to buy their bonds. Well, guess what? They had to put an interest rate on their bonds of something like 20%. That's very difficult. What this means is that United States debt is very cheap, but the debt for countries that are struggling is very high, okay? And so so Greece effectively defaulted on its debt. As a result, I believe it was the World Bank bailed them out. When these institutions come calling to bail out a nation, they impose something called structural adjustment. What that means is they want to change some shit around. They come and they say, oh, you want our money? This has happened to Argentina several times. You want our money? Very interesting. You have to change the way you do business. We do not like that your taxes are so high. We do not like that you have so many regulations. You need to become more business friendly, okay? When she talks at the end of the book about what the United States did in Iraq, this is effectively what the IMF, the World Bank have been doing for years and decades. And because they are gripped with neoliberal reason. Now, one of the things that they were famous for doing was urging privatization. In some cases, privatization of very basic, necessary services. In a couple countries in Africa, they forced countries to privatize the water system. In one famous case, a French company bought the water system of a country I forget, and they jacked up prices so high that people could not afford water anymore, okay? Now, let's talk about prisons for a second. It is true that prisons in this country have been highly privatized. What are a business's interest in running a prison? Or let me make this very blunt. How is a business likely to run a prison?
I was gonna say something, but knew, I guess, better how to answer the first part of the question, or like the first way that it was worded. But I guess going off of this second one, if prisons are privatized, does that mean that they get to sell shares, kind of, and then companies come in to make agreements for the prison labor?
You are absolutely right. Two of the biggest private prison companies are on the stock market in America. That
Yeah, fun fact, when Trump was elected, ticker sign GEO, I forgot what the other one was, it went up about 50% in 2 days.
Good.
Yeah.
I also had a question about structural adjustment. Would you say that in a way, with like the World Bank or the IMF, that's almost like them coming in and having like, because you're like saying that they want to use their money and they want things done a certain way, that's like them, I guess, being board of directors kind of a country now because they have like a certain amount of shares?
They've gotten in a lot of criticism for being bullies in a way, you know, for imposing this value, this agenda on them. Laurel asks a very good question in the chat. Does structural adjustment only affect economic policies or could have an effect on other countries' politics or social issues? Anybody want to speak to that? Because Wendy Brown does. I think the case of Iraq actually is salient here. In the chapter in Iraq, she points out that neoliberalism considers itself to be, she uses the word value neutral, right? This is why she's talking about all this kind of like standard or boilerplate business language that has infiltrated government. This idea, this notion of best practices, for example, right? The neoliberal economic agenda, which was imposed in Iraq, these were sold as best practices. And why wouldn't you do best practices, right? Of course you're going to do best practices. So it suggests that it is value free, but that is not at all the case, right? There is a kind of, I think the answer to your question, Laura, is that absolutely it affects it. From the neoliberal standpoint, they don't think they do, but it does impose a value for sure, right? The case that comes to mind is the impact this had on the farmers in Iraq. Does anybody want to tell us what happened to the farmers in Iraq after the United States moved in?
I'm not entirely sure, but aren't they pretty much like non-existent right now?
It's pretty rough. There was some practice in particular which they were up to, which the United States did not care for. What was it? It has to do with patenting seeds.
Oh. Oh, was it opioid
No.
related? Oh, no, okay. I don't know where that was going then.
Anybody know who likes to patent seeds? Who is into patenting seeds?
Monsanto.
Santo, the bastards. Why do they patent seeds?
They spend a lot of money developing genetically modified versions of those seeds.
And what does that mean for?
They want to collect royalties from farmers who plant their seeds.
What did this mean for the Iraqi farmers?
I don't know. I mean, like, I'm assuming that, like, these Iraqi farmers weren't making that much money in the first place, so why are they gonna pay some fucking, like, royalties, rather than what they're using in the first place?
Well, she points out that the seeds that were pushed on the Iraqi farmers, these were patented seeds for wheat to be grown for pasta. But there is one very curious thing. I don't know what you guys know about Iraqis, but how do Iraqis feel about pasta? Guys, does anybody know what Iraqi food is like? I'm looking to see if anybody.
They don't eat pasta.
They don't eat pasta. Thank you. So why were they given seeds to grow wheat for pasta?
So it could be exported to other countries.
Exactly. So what is lost in that? Well, now suddenly the Iraqi farmers are forced to, Iraq as a nation is forced to import food. It had food sovereignty. It had a sustainable food economy. It could feed itself. Suddenly that was taken away. And her argument is that that seems kind of like, this is a long answer to your question, Laurel, but what looks to be value neutral is not, right? There was a presumption that, this kind of sustainability is unimportant, right? This kind of sustainability is inessential, okay? You must be dependent. You must be locked into the global economy. That's just a best practice, of course. Let's talk for a second about, how's that, Laurel? Is that okay? Yeah. Anybody want to add on or ask any questions? Let's press into the example of prison privatization. How is a business going to run a prison, everybody? What do you expect to see, or what do you expect you won't see? How do you expect it will?
Cheap labor.
Cheap labor.
Cutting costs everywhere possible.
Such as?
Food quality, toiletry quality, literal living conditions. Yeah.
And also sometimes with staffing issues, if you have, what's it called, like less guards and things like that, and then they become overworked, it tends to bring up more like social tension and issues between guards and inmates.
Good, excellent. Are these consequences value laden? What values, I'm going to ask the question differently. What values are communicated through these decisions?
That property and money matter instead of the individual, and even like the working conditions for the people who aren't the elites of the prison.
What is the point of prison?
To punish.
Or
supposedly.
It's to punish, or it is
labor.
To ideally rehabilitate.
Thank you. It's punishment or rehabilitation. Okay? Which does the neoliberal reason end up with?
Management.
Obviously, right? What kind of rehabilitation is coming out of a neoliberal, out of a private prison? Doesn't look like much, right? Is rehabilitation good for business? Why?
It's a,
Often,
sorry.
there you go.
You need a revolving door to keep yourself in business.
And what would rehabilitation require? That is true. Great point, Gabriel.
I was gonna mention like when there's rehabilitation involved, often that can require, well, of course, extra costs because then in prison that can mean like actual professors or teachers coming in and doing like community college courses, and that's just one thing. But then it can go into therapist coming in, really like anybody that you would, I guess, even think about bringing in at a regular rehab facility, or what you would foresee somebody doing after getting out of a traditional rehab facility, but then it's provided to you in prison so that you can be rehabilitated when you're out instead of forced back into the same situation. And that doesn't make sense to people. Well,
Good.
not that it doesn't make sense, but then if you get back into prison a second time or even a time after that, then they're just continuing to make money off of your labor. So why rehabilitate when they can keep seeing you back in the prison?
Excellent.
It's
Rashad,
supposed to be called the Department of Corrections, right?
it is called the Department of Corrections.
I don't know if I don't think the slogan is still, maybe it's just in California, to correct and rehabilitate.
They're not invested in correction, right? Their prevailing economic policy has imposed different value here. Rashad, did you want to say something?
Oh no, my bad. My mic wasn't turned off, and I was responding.
Okay.
I was responding to like a call I was getting.
Okay. Good. Well, you know, for the international students and the Americans in the house, you know, let's talk a little bit about how politics is run in this country. Let's talk about lobbies. Turns out, so for every private sector of the economy, there are lobbies. Does anybody know some of these lobbies?
The NRA.
The NRA, the big dog, in trouble now. National Rifle Association, everybody, representing the arms industry, trying to get us all killed or armed and killed. Anybody know another lobby? How about an influential lobby?
Do the oh, you go.
I'm not 100% sure what you mean by lobby, but I know that in Panama, at least, sometimes it's very hard for like social like workers that do not work with the government to do stuff because the first lady is the one in charge of all the like social work foundations and things. And if you don't like run things through her, like the company or whatever, I know it's hard to get some permits.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, every like social work or donation that you do, they want like the first lady asks for her stamp to be on it.
Well, that's much more overt. Lobbies are only slightly less overt. And thank you for prodding me to define a lobby. A lobby is basically, there's another term for a lobby. Does anybody know what these are? A PAC, Political Action Committee. Political Action Committee. Gabriel, were you trying to say something?
Well, I was gonna say, like, interesting, like where the word lobbyist comes from is that if you ever been to the Capitol building, or watched any like TV shows or stuff like that, you have the senators and the representatives. They move through all the halls from their offices, and they're constantly going back and forth for meetings here and there. you need to get special permissions to be in there for whatever reason. But, through the lobbies, right, these people will, pull you aside to get a quick note with you, to update you, and so like they're lobbyists because they hang out in the lobby a lot of the time, trying to grab your attention when they can't get a official meeting at the moment.
I'm glad you raised that. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
That's where the word comes from.
So about lobbies, and I am going to relate this to the private prisons just a second. In this country, lobbies are hugely, hugely influential, and they exercise their influence through campaign donations. And then the elected officials then, or politicians, they have to spend that money on media. And it has become extremely expensive now to run a campaign. So they are highly dependent on raising money. I understand that there is a recent show on Netflix that popped up over the summer. I think it's about a representative from Florida by the name of Matt Getz, who I'm not such a fan of, but it's about his life as a congressman. And basically he spends half his workday fundraising. So lobbyists are happy to give you money, right? And so, but then politicians are going to be beholden to these lobbyists. The NRA is one of the most generous lobbyists. Okay, maybe not so much now since they're going bankrupt apparently, but there is a lobby for basically every single economic entity in this country. I am particularly interested in food, and the meat lobby, the beef lobby is huge. The pork lobby is immensely powerful. The milk lobby, hugely powerful. And what these lobbies do is they encourage your elected officials to increase subsidies on milk or pork or beef so that they can then market these around the world competitively. Okay. Well, everybody, guess what? Private prisons. Oh, yes. They have a lobby too. What kind of laws do you think the private prison lobbies like? What's their agenda with people in Congress? What do they want Congress people to support? What do you think?
Keeping people in
Criminalization of drugs.
Sorry, Gia?
The criminalization of drugs. They don't want it to be decriminalized.
Thank you. There was another one. Someone else?
Yeah, I was gonna say just to keep them in jail as long as possible.
Okay, good.
I think mandatory minimums is what it's called.
You know what? Can you say what that is?
If I recall correctly, it's like there's a mandatory minimum sentence for possession of marijuana for like a very small amount or something like that.
Thank you. One of the biggest opponents of criminal justice reform is going to be the private prison industry, because this is good for business. So they are very opposed to decriminalizing drugs. They are very happy that illegal immigration is criminalized. They are not happy when they hear about getting rid of mandatory minimums, or what are called the 3 strikes laws. And 3 strikes, by the way, for the international students around us, what that means is that, you have 3, you steal, you get caught stealing one time, maybe, I don't know, the second strike was assault and battery, and the third, they caught you with a joint, right? That 3rd strike, you get a mandatory minimum of, I'll just throw a number out there, like 10 years. The reason I'm explaining this to you all is this indicates why the US prison population is the biggest in the world. I want to stress this, okay? The United States does not have the biggest prison population by proportion, right? No. The United States has the biggest population of people in prison on the planet. And the reason this is absurd and outrageous is because there are 2 countries on this planet that have 1 billion people each. That would be China and India, and they respectively have smaller prison populations than we do. The United States at 300 million has the biggest people of incarcerated in the world, okay? The oldest democracy. This is highly ironic. We will be talking about this when we get to Michelle Alexander. But
Also felons can't vote. Like, I thought you'd mention that, but that's like literally not likely to change anytime soon.
Well, Florida did, right?
Yeah.
Some state. That's state by state. But thank you for that. I'm sticking to the economic ramifications here. The point is that, again, we're back at Laurel's question, right? These seemingly value neutral policies end up having huge ramifications on society in ways that seem very value laden. They suggest that prisoners are not human, that prisoners are not worth correction or rehabilitation, or that's just too expensive, or that's not what prisons are about, right? There are some countries that do this completely differently. And look where that agenda leads. That agenda leads to lobbying our laws to drive up the population of imprisoned. It's fucking insane, right? That points to another issue that she raises over and over again, which is that thanks to neoliberal reason, the relationship of business and government is incestuous, and they feed into one another, and they're impossible to distinguish at the end of the day. And by the way, they talk about the revolving door of government, and what they mean in Washington, they speak about a revolving door of government. What they mean by a revolving door is that when you leave the Senate, if you get voted out, many elected officials, they go to lobbies. They will work at lobbies because they're going to be paid nicely, and they know that they know how the system works, and they can reach out to their colleagues. So they'll get a nice job for them, okay? I see that Gloria has a question in the chat, just says, gun policy? So I don't know what the question is. Gloria, you want to explain yourself?
I was just answering the question about like what prison doesn't want for and I wasn't sure, and they said gun policy.
Yeah. I'm trying to think about that one, if that's the case. I mean, there are certain laws for possession of guns. Some states have pretty strict laws about that, others do not. I haven't heard that the prison lobby weighs in on that. That means they would have to square off against the NRA, and so far they have not had the appetite to do that. So I don't know. I'm not sure about that. Any other questions or comments at this point? Following Gabriel's comment in the chat, the banking lobby, Wall Street lobby, they are immensely powerful and they're immensely rich. So when President Obama was trying to put through a reform law of the banks back in 2010, he had a big opponent in the bank lobby. They did not want to see it. He faced the same when it came to healthcare reform. The doctors have a very powerful lobby. The health insurance companies have an immensely powerful lobby. They actually won the day in the end, and they ended up writing Obamacare. So that's what these lobbyists do. These lobbyists, they effectively write these laws, and then they hand them over to the politicians to sign them. Questions? Comments? Good. Pharmaceutical lobbies. I can only imagine what they're up to right now, right? With the coronavirus vaccine. It'll be interesting. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to the news lately, but they had to put, they're being, at least pharmaceutical companies are being called on to push back against the White House's claim. The White House is claiming we're going to have a vaccine by when? Who knows? You'll never guess.
Election day.
Sorry, Zachary, I didn't hear you.
I said election day. At least that's, yeah.
Surprise, surprise, right? And the pharmaceutical companies have said, yeah, maybe not. That's rushing it there. So good.
Mom actually works for a big pharmaceutical company it's a production plant, and they're working with like Pfizer and a couple, like 50 different companies actually right now, but they started with like Pfizer and like 4 other ones who were testing, and they were already always saying like, yeah, it's probably going to be like next March by the time like everybody, even like when testing and stuff happens. And then by the time people get trained on how to make everything and mass produce it, and then it's even safe for like 400 people to be back at the production plant, like it's going to be super long, and everybody knew that. So I have no idea where everybody else is getting other numbers from, because that just sounds ridiculous.
We already have an amazing final research paper topic here. If someone wants to go with it, what was the impact of the pharmaceutical lobbies on the pandemic? On the coronavirus vaccine. It'd be fascinating to see how that plays out. Gabriel points out that Obamacare is super conservative. It was actually written by a group called the Heritage Foundation. And the Heritage Foundation is one of the most radically conservative think tanks in Washington. They came up with the blueprint for Obamacare back in around the year 2000. It was implemented first by a Republican governor of Massachusetts. Anybody know who it is? When I tell you, you'll say, I know him. I'll give you a hint. He ran against Obama.
Arnold.
He ran against Obama. Your choices are limited, y'all.
McCain?
Nope.
McCain was governor?
Nope.
Talking about Mitt Romney?
Oh, Paul. No.
Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney was governor of Massachusetts. And
Wait, Romney was governor of...
Yes. Because he was with Bain Capital, which is based in Boston. So he
But
lived
it was
in
like
Boston.
only politics.
And so that made for really interesting debates back in 2012 when the Republicans were trying to assail Obama about Obamacare, and he turned and said to Mitt, hey, dude, you instituted this in Massachusetts. And Mitt's retort was singularly lame. He said, yeah, but I didn't do it nationwide. Worked in a state, whatever. Anyway, so you're totally right, Gabriel. If time permits during class sometime, I will explain to you the economics of Obamacare. It's a little bit complicated, but it is obviously that it was written with the, it's basically a way to expand healthcare by way of satiating the private market. That's what it did. And health insurance companies, they have proved it, any case. So I got to move on. We have 10 minutes. I want to talk about one more thing here before we break. She says around page, where is this? Page 36. She talks about competition, and she says that really what is distinctive about neoliberal reason and neoliberal states and neoliberal democracies is, I just realized I skipped over something. Holy shit. All right, I'm going to do this really quick. Neoliberalism. Where does that term come from? Okay. The term liberalism is a term that was used by I put in the chat, by a guy by the name of Ludwig von Mises. Ludwig von Mises was an economist who lived, I believe, from like the 1880s to the 1950s. His main work was called liberalism. I've taught it. I think I'm teaching it again this spring. It's exciting. Basically, here's the point, everybody. Back in the late 1700s, a guy by the name of Adam Smith writes Wealth of Nations. This is taken to be the classic work of capitalism, explaining capitalist economics. Well, Adam Smith, one of the issues that is a little bit up in the air with Adam Smith, or one of the issues that he kind of leaves up in the air, is the role of government intervention in the economy. Should the government intervene? To what extent? How? There is a group, there are people who read Adam Smith and say that the government should have no role at all. And we call these people laissez-faire capitalists. From the French, laissez-faire, which means to let do. Let it be. Let the economy be. Sometimes they're also called market fundamentalists. Ludwig von Mises is the man who articulated this. Now, there is a serious strain of economists who think that the government should have a major role, and that is perfectly in harmony with Adam Smith's thinking. The main man on this case was a guy by the name of John Maynard Keynes. And he writes his classic work, I believe, in the 1930s. And you still have a big selection of people who are they call them Keynesians. Stiglitz, Joseph Stiglitz, who's Paul Krugman, who writes in the New York Times. These are the kind of the middle ground capitalists. These are the guys who say that capitalism itself requires government support, otherwise it will implode. But von Mises kind of, he is the one who comes up with this idea, or not comes up with it, but he articulates the idea of liberalism. And that was in the 1920s and 30s, and then it was championed again in the 1960s by a guy by the name of Milton Friedman. And Milton Friedman is hands down the most influential American economist ever. He taught at the University of Chicago. He educated many officials in government, in particular the head of the Federal Reserve, who sets the interest rates and basically regulates the economy. And so Greenbaum, sorry, I'm losing some names here. Why am I telling you all this? Well, I just want you to understand the pedigree of neoliberalism, that it comes from an economic theory, and you all are probably familiar with the term laissez-faire. Okay, so there you have it. That is the pedigree of it. And Milton Friedman was very influential in this government. He played a major role writing the economic policy of Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. So he is what Wendy Brown is talking about. This is the neoliberal reason personified. Okay, good. So she says that in neoliberalism, competition replaces exchange as the market's root principle and basic good. Competition replaces exchange as the market's root principle and basic good. This is on page 36. How is competition a good? How does this thinking go?
Is it competition in terms of like between companies, so that there's variety, and then also I forget what it's called, but it's just where there's more of a choice for the consumer.
Excellent. Let's go that way. How is competition good for companies? Excellent. More choice. What else? Hello? Someone say something? How else is competition good for companies?
Lowers the price of a mid-sized sedan for all of us.
Among other things. Yeah. Competition is supposed to be good for consumers because it forces companies to make good products and sell them cheaper. How is competition good for workers?
We get nicer products.
Okay.
For workers, wouldn't you get like competitive wages, like a place could pay you more?
Rockin', you nailed it. The idea in economic theory is that competition is good for all shareholders, all what they call stakeholders. That would be consumers, that would be workers, and the companies themselves. The companies are forced to work hard and diligently and efficiently and not sit on their laurels, okay? Now, she says that we are going to see this in politics as well, the idea that competition, this is another prong of neoliberalism. This is another mode of thinking, that competition is virtuous, that competition is good, and this has a lot of ramifications. And she starts talking about these ramifications on page 37. On one hand, she says, competition, we've already been talking about this, right? Competition influences the way you have to sell yourself, right? This is what's urging on your entrepreneurialism, right? Because you're thinking about all the other people that you have to compete with, right? She says, we must make ourselves valuable to the state and the corporations, and we have to compete with others to do so. And if we make ourselves uncompetitive, well, then we are going to be in deep doo-doo according to neoliberalism, because as we were talking about, neoliberalism tends to get rid of the welfare state as well. So if you're not competitive your whole goddamn life, this sounds like the pressure that Gio was talking about earlier. If you're not competitive your whole damn life, there's going to be a problem here, okay? And you will have no one to save you. But let's get into this issue. What does this, if competition is virtuous, if competition is good, what does this mean for inequality? What does this mean for how we view inequality? What does this mean for how we tolerate it?
We see it as normal
Why?
because in competition you're generally not on like the same pedestal. Like you're always trying to be better than another.
Good. There will be winners and there will be losers in society. So her argument is that because competition is preeminent, it causes us to accept very high levels of inequality, higher than normal. And that is an interesting point to make because, at least in the United States, we are dealing with, if not throughout the capitalist world, the levels of inequality are rising. That's what economists tell us, right? So one reason that this is accepted or tolerated or maybe even goes unnoticed is because you're just going to have the winners and you're going to have the losers. She also tells us on page 38, she says that the ramifications of the preeminence of competition, she says, quote, labor disappears as a category. Class also. And we don't speak in terms of alienation of labor, of alienating labor. We don't speak in terms of exploitation. In other words, the losers, they get what they deserve, okay? Furthermore, I'm just moving ahead because I want to get these points across before we break. She tells us on the next page, 39, citizenship is no longer concerned with public things and the common good. That's a result of competition as well. You're looking out for yourself, right? You have to look out for yourself. That's the point. You don't look out for others. How can you? They're competing with you, right? So this idea that we have a shared fate, this diminishes, this falls away, this evaporates. She talks about homo economicus, like economic man, that's the Latin for it, right? That's how we are all seen. We're not seen as citizens anymore. We're seen as homo economicus. Homo economicus cannot think in terms of public purposes, but only private gain, right? And of course, this fits neatly with one of the tenets of Wealth of Nations. I know we're finishing up here, well, let me speak to that for a second, actually. I'm going to, 5:30 will be our end, but it's not going to be a hard end. So if people want to, if you have to go, that's fine. But, I'm happy to stick around and chat with people as well, okay? Some of you indicated you like to stick around, and that's perfectly fine with me. Let me just finish this point here about public and private. Yes, we can, this is what I was saying, right? So one of the central tenets of Wealth of Nations is this idea of the invisible hand. Does anybody know what that is all about?
like I remember reading about it when we were talking about responsibilization, that you feel this pressure by like this invisible entity. It's not necessarily like the authority, it's just like that this is your responsibility as a citizen, like it's your job to do this, even though you might not be like directly, it might not be directly beneficial to you, or you might be at risk, but you have to do it.
Good. So I'll run with that. So Adam Smith, one of the more famous passages of Wealth of Nation, he uses the metaphor of an invisible hand. And his principle is that if everybody is pursuing their own personal good, this will benefit everybody as if by an invisible hand. What that means is basically the harder you work, the more money you make, the more money that you then have to spend and enrich others. But you don't have to do this, but you achieve this through egoism. So there's a his theory is something that a lot of people in the laissez-faire camp, they love, which is the idea that you can help the general good by being selfish. In fact, he says, the more selfish you are, well, this is what Milton Friedman says. Milton Friedman says, double down on the selfishness. The more selfish you are, the better you can actually help other people. And they take it to this extent. They say that if you actually are too public-minded, guess what? You're going to undermine the public good. So just be fucking selfish. And then this leads to a policy which a lot of you probably have heard of, which is called trickle-down economics. Has anybody heard of trickle-down economics? Trickle-down economics means that that if the wealthy are doing well, their funds will trickle down to everybody else. You build a pool, you got to spend money on pool maintenance. You build an extra large garage, you're paying construction workers and then cleaning service and blah, 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 right? So the wealth is spread when you are being selfish and greedy on your own, okay? All right, I'm going to hit on two last points here, and then I'm going to open it up and also just break, okay? She says also on page 40, she says, justice recedes in the face of economic concerns. Thanks to the preeminence or the predominance of of competition, justice recedes in the face of economic concerns, right? And what that means is basically that we've been talking about this as well, is that, if criminal justice reform has its eye on justice, well, the interests of neoliberal reason is going to urge in the opposite direction, right? It's going to urge in terms of the bottom line, and it will urge us to ignore justice, right? And in general, liberty is transformed, she says, and I'm going to hit on this quote here as we finish here. It's on page 41. She says in the middle of the page, and by the way, I forgot to ask this earlier, but for those of you who have digital copies, do the page numbers match up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Yes, no.
I'll send my link to the group because so far it has been adding up.
Okay. Well, in any case, this is on page 41. This is towards the end of chapter 1. A few pages from the end. She says, liberty itself is narrowed. This is thanks to neoliberalism. Liberty itself is narrowed to market conduct, divested of association with mastering the conditions of life, existential freedom, or securing the rule of the demos. Freedom conceived minimally as self-rule and more robustly as participation ruled by a demos gives way to comportment with a market instrumental rationality that radically constrains both choices and ambitions. With the vanquishing of Homo politicus, the creature who rules itself and rules as part of the demos, no longer is there an open question of how to craft the self or what paths to travel in life. The idea is that, we are no longer free to be something, to fulfill ourselves necessarily, as if there was some kind of special human fulfillment. Ludwig von Mises actually says at the opening of liberalism, his book, he says, I'm not going to talk about happiness. That's not my concern. When I talk about freedom, I'm going to talk about freedom from constraints. You are free to compete, and the government You are freer to the extent that the government steps out of your way and enables you to compete. But the government is not involved in you being the morally best person you can be. That has nothing to do with the bottom line here. So her point is that this is a greatly impoverished notion of liberty now that neoliberalism has imparted to us. And basically she ends that quote by saying, no longer is there an open question of how to craft the self or what paths to travel in life. There's no longer a question here. You're not free to choose necessarily, because that doesn't really make sense. Don't forget, we've been talking about best practices as if the mystery were already taken out, okay? Neoliberalism is the ascendance of economics. And economics is supposedly a science, okay? And if a science has determined the best practices, then guess what? There is no goddamn debate. So this is another way in which neoliberalism becomes devastating for democracy. It gives us no reason to debate. It undermines choice. There's no such thing as choice. The whole example about Iraq fits into this very well also. She points out that all of these policy proposals, all these best practices, these were forced on Iraq before they had formed a democratic government. The assumption being, well, of course you want to do these things because these are the best practices, okay? What does that leave for democratic interest? What does that leave for democratic involvement or enthusiasm? And the answer is, it doesn't leave much. Like, what's the point, right? If a science is making these decisions, what's the point? By the way, economics is a social science. Just, okay, we're not at a traditional university here, but if you were at a place like Hopkins or Maryland, you have a division of liberal arts, then you have a division of natural science, and then you have a division of social science. And economics fits under the social sciences together with psychology, political science, anthropology, and sociology. Okay. Now, there are plenty of people who dispute. There are many economists who dispute the extent to which it is a science. That is a lively debate, but not according to the neoliberals. According to the neoliberals, this is a science. There is no debate. All right, I'm going to pause there. Questions? Comments? Objections? Applause for Mason, thank you. Yay, neoliberalism. Is that what she's saying? No, I'm joking.
It's pretty depressing to
It is very
to
depressing.
learn more about something you already thought you knew about, and then just then realize when you have a conversation, then you realize like the scope of the problem, which you knew was large, is actually far larger and almost impossible to change.
Oh, hey, don't get carried away there now. It's not, it's possible to change. It's just that this is a very powerful influence. It's a very powerful force in government, and this government as well. And you pointed out, Gabriel, both our elected officials are kind of beholden to it. It's true. I mean, that was the point of her quoting Obama's inauguration speech, that, you know, even someone on the left side of politics in America is wrapped up in this, right? Viewing the government as a kind of a business. He has to attract investors. He has to make us shareholders content, you know, and happy and thriving. And his job is to create jobs, you know. It is, and we're not the only country beholden to this, of course. Every democracy is in the same boat.
I don't know what you think of this, but I was reading recently, just sort of that you know, for a long time, like Republicans which were more neoliberal, they've always, I think, had disdain for the base that votes for them. But in order to get their policies through, they had to subserviate themselves to basically the worst, cultural people, because like people on Wall Street are not, the same way I would say culturally backwards as many, Trump supporters or so forth. But now that we've sort of come around full circle, Biden is sort of the first candidate in which they don't have to appeal to like a base that they despise and get the same exact results. Ultimately positing.
What's your question? What's your question?
No, I'm just saying, like, does that sort of make theory or like hold any water to you in the sense that that sort of a lot of those right-wing policies, coming from like, use the backs of right-wing voters, just sort of coupling them with like backward social issues, right, in order to pass them through. But we're seeing less and less of that as they're able to just pass it through with Democrats as well.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
I guess so. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, a couple things come to mind. I wrote a book about guns, so I'm thinking about guns, and that issue is changing. Only about 5 years ago, Democrats were also beholden to the NRA, and that has changed. The Democrats are no longer beholden to the NRA. In fact, they're going the other direction, which is pretty interesting. I don't know why this popped in my head, but the other thing that you made me think of, Gabriel, is how the Republican Party, which is neoliberal, more neoliberal than the left at least, how they appeal to workers. And they have, like West Virginia. West Virginia is a working class state, and they voted for Trump by 20 points, percentage points. What's going on there? Well, they were successful in campaigning in West Virginia on a policy of, get rid of environmental regulations. It's good for you because it'll create jobs, cut taxes for the rich who run our corporations because then they have more money to hire you, right? And the list goes down. They were able, for some reason, to sell supply side economics or the trickle down theory to workers. Maybe maybe the workers were secretly appealed by other things they might well have been, like racism, but they at least talked the talk, and they said that they were economic policies are, that this has been important to them, that neoliberalism can help the worker, and the way it helps the worker is by creating jobs and by loosening up on corporations so that they have more leeway and more power to hire and create jobs. I always thought that was a little bit of a strange argument because West Virginia has dealt with extreme levels of pollution thanks to the coal industry. Just a few years ago, their river in Charleston got polluted by the coal industry, and the coal industry basically got away with it, so, but any case. Any other questions or comments? Mason is talking about political compass memes, and I have to plead ignorant. I don't even know. I don't even know.
You should check them out.
I will.
They get pretty abstract. It's good.
In between trying
Are you familiar with the political compass?
No.
Of course.
Ah, okay. So familiarize yourself with this, which is instead of it sort of being a line for left and right, it's actually four corners. Let me see if I could put
it's like left to right on the horizontal axis, and then like authoritarian versus libertarian on the vertical axis.
Cool. Yeah, I know that now. I got it. Well, why is that important? Or why is that good? Why is it useful?
I mean, I was just thinking about it because as we were talking about it, a lot of this, a lot of what you're saying kind of reminds me of what would it be? Right-wing libertarianism with
Yeah.
I'm gonna butcher this.
I think liberalism. I think we're talking more about the vertical compass, right? If I'm understanding you all correctly, not the horizontal axis. Neoliberals don't tend to care about the
I
conservative.
put one in the chat here.
Okay. Neoliberals don't tend to care about the moral conservative policy. They don't tend to. Right? Because they're value neutral, supposedly, right? That's what they said. And yet, according to Wendy Brown, I think she's right, they weren't value neutral. Thank you. Oh, and thanks, Gabriel, for posting that there. I'll check it out in a bit. Anybody else? Any other questions or comments? Oh, Laurel points out loser is one of Donald's favorite insults. It's true. I know. I'm telling you, man. The losers, you know. I'll tell you where this, this term really came up, and it really struck me at the time. It was awful. You guys were probably children, but back in 2010, when Obamacare debate was going through, the right said this is essentially, and what Obamacare did is it extended healthcare to like 40 million Americans. Well, people on the right, the critics said, you're giving healthcare to people who don't deserve it because they don't have a job. You must have a job. And if you don't have it, you are a loser. And there were some horrible things said at debates, at the Republican presidential debates, about losers in society, that they don't deserve healthcare and they may deserve to die as a result. So this idea really does infect, our thinking in awful ways sometimes. I remember in 2010, Ron Paul, he was running. He's the father of Rand Paul. And Ron Paul is a strict libertarian. He was asked at a debate by the moderator, if someone is struck by a car and they don't have health insurance, do you think they should be brought to the hospital by an ambulance? And someone in the crowd yelled out, "Let him die." Let him die, right? That was on TV. So they are the undeserving. You don't have a job, you don't have health insurance, you're not deserving. Yay, America. Anybody else? Comments, questions, memes?
I was wondering if, because we're kind of talking about how democracy is diminishing and like starting to go into all of that. And I was wondering if the conversation in the coming weeks was going to go into, I guess, how we could change all of that. So I've just been learning a little bit more about like ranked choice voting and things like that.
Right, okay, right. So you don't want this to be a total downer. That's what you're saying here. Hey, no worries.
Positive, positive.
I get this complaint all the time. I'm no stranger to it. My reading list is always depressing, but hey, no, we are going to absolutely talk about that for sure. I think that's important. I think that it comes up in your reading for next week already. You can't have a constructive response to rehabilitating democracy if you're not clear about the threats. But we are absolutely going to talk about that for sure. But representative democracy may not be the best way to do it. Right? The way that we run it in this country with electoral college, that may not be the best way. But I'm not going to talk about that yet.
No, yeah, that's a whole nother thing. But cool.
Anybody else? This gives me a good segue to plug something, by the way. So very shortly, there's going to be a publicity going around to everybody in the MICA community that we have a symposium for Constitution Day, which is on September 17th, a week from tomorrow. And the topic is called Justice in the Vote. And it is going to be headlined by two speakers who are going to be talking about issues of disenfranchisement, how to correct that. And also one of the panelists, he's an author and historian. He's going to talk about the Electoral College. And he's going to talk about the origins of it and why it should why we should get rid of it, how it undermines our democracy today. So very important discussion next Thursday, 6:30 to 8 on Zoom. I'll send you all the publicity, okay? Any other questions or comments? Well, listen up, everybody. So just the way we're going to run this going forward, in case I wasn't totally clear, 5:30, that's when I said, you guys can leave if you have to. But if you are welcome to stick around, and if the conversation continues, I'm not going to make that a hard end. I'm going to keep going until someone tells me to shut up, or you guys, whenever the conversation is done. So that's about it for today, unless anybody has any other questions or comments at this point. God, you all look so depressed. I'm really sorry. Are you 21 yet? Go have a beer. I know, what a downer. Started with such a downer. Hey man, it's all up. It's all up. It's going to be better from here, I promise. Well, except when we talk about the prison industrial complex and police violence. That's going to suck. But generally, upwards. All right, that way, upwards. I don't know. Any last word? Question, comments, whatever. All right. Well, I'm going to take a look at your reading responses probably tomorrow, because I'm going to go have a beer. And let's see, what else I should tell you. You have your reading assignment in Wendy Brown for next week, which I believe is chapters 5 and 6. I see that some of you shared links to digital versions of the text here. So if you all want to get it, it's right there. You have reading responses for next week as well. Please do them before class. Please give me a healthy paragraph for each answer. Make sure they are substantive and detailed. And like I said earlier, when I read your reading responses for today, I'm going to comment on them if need be. So please do pay attention to those comments. Okay. And I believe that is everything. Oh, and I've recorded this session, and I'm going to put this on Canvas so you can watch this class over and over and over and just get more and more depressed until you commit suicide. Okay? How's that? All right. I'm done. You done? All right. Yeehaw, Mason says. I know. See you, everybody. Have a great week, okay? Email me if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to stick around if anybody wants to talk.
Bye.
Hey, Gabriel. What's up? You want to talk about something?
Okay, just a tiny thing.
Go for it.
Just because it's us. Do you know this guy named Yanis Varoufakis?
No.
He's like a parliament guy. Okay, because the things I've heard about neoliberalism, like I've heard he's an economist that has done lectures at like the New School and stuff. Like in opposition to neoliberalism, and I find these talks to be very enlightening about it.
Was he the president of Greece?
Like Noam Chomsky and stuff. So
I think he was the president of Greece. No, is this the guy?
He was like a big player in what you were talking about earlier about the Greek banking thing.
The Greek president a few years ago, he had been a professor of economics at Texas in Austin, and he went back home to run for office. I don't know if this is the guy, and he was opposed to structural adjustment. So I'm not sure. I don't recall how successful he was. He had a tough job, but I don't know this guy. Send me his name when you get a chance, okay?
Okay.
Or if you have some speeches of his on YouTube, I'd love to see it.
Sure.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Cool. Hey, Cindy, do you want to talk about something?
Yeah, I just have a very kind of relevant, kind of irrelevant question to ask you. And have you ever watched Parasite?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, not gonna lie. This discussion, it was a bit. It's a very depressing thing to hear, especially on my birthday today.
Oh, no, you definitely deserve a beer.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I don't know why, but like there was like a point where my brain was like, why does this kind of remind me of Parasite, especially the ending? So I just kind of like, man,
So why were you
this
thinking?
stage just get
No, but why were you thinking of Parasite? Tell me.
well, wasn't the end, at least what I remember, like the ending of like when the son wanted to basically like he had dreams of like getting successful and rebuying the house to save his dad and
Yes.
like making enough money to do that. He realizes that you can't do that because when you're in that position, in that sort of financial position, it's really hard to get up like on the